Hi there, Jake here. We are now officially into November, with Election Day officially behind us, the day that I previously described as our deadline to save the world. So I'm sure you must be wondering, did we do it? Well, we don't know yet. One thing that's for certain is that we can't go back to brunch yet. Not that I was going to brunches before. Were a lot of people going to brunch before? Was that just a thing I was never aware of? Like, I never got invited to brunch, except occasionally Easter brunch, but I'm Jewish and it usually overlaps with Passover, so I can never eat the waffles. But that's not what's important right now. What is important is that I do feel a little less scared than I felt a month ago, and I want to talk to you about why that is, and what we still need to do to save the world. First off, we should all recognize this was never going to be easy. While a lot of Americans have recognized the fascist threat that Trump represents over the course of the last 4 years, Trump himself has also had those 4 years to reinforce his power and influence. We're talking widespread misinformation, legislation to suppress the vote through reduction of resources and tightening of restrictions, and people placed in positions of power who have a vested interest in not respecting the rule of law. And that's not even getting into the whole global pandemic thing and the steady dismantling of postal services during one of the most unsafe times to vote in person in recent history, or the actual physical intimidation of voters and campaign workers through tactics that very much bring to mind a certain period of the 1930s. But all that being said, we had a reasonable level of certainty that certain things were going to be happening in this election, and this allowed for us to appropriately plan for them. 1. We knew that mail-in ballots were going to play a major part in this election because of the global pandemic, and we knew that Democrats were going to be more likely to utilize mail-in ballots than Republicans because of their tendency to take the pandemic more seriously. 2. We knew there were several swing states that have laws that dictate that mail-in ballots be counted after the in-person ballots on Election Day. This means that those mail-in ballots I just mentioned that Democrats favor were going to be counted after the in-person ballots that Republicans favor, creating the initial illusion of a Republican lead regardless of the final count. 3. We knew that because of all this, the ballots were going to take longer to count than they normally do, and I want to remind you, they are never fully counted by the end of election night. This never happens. When you see projected winners on election night, it is based on who is most likely to win based off of early vote counts in regions that are considered representative of their states as a whole. Which brings us to 4. We knew that this was going to be close. While polls indicated that Biden did have a sizable lead nationally, those margins were much closer in the swing states. And for Republican-controlled swing states, voter suppression tactics had a greater likelihood of skewing things in Trump's favor. And 5. We knew that Donald Trump was going to claim victory regardless of the outcome. He said as much himself. And all of these things did come to pass. So for those people who thought that this was going to be a landslide, this may have been a bit of a rude awakening, and there is an understandable tendency to believe that we are all about to relive the shock of 2016. But we're not. Yet. You see, beyond all the things that we knew would happen, there were 3 things that we needed to happen to successfully combat Trump's claims to victory. Number 1. We needed for early reports to immediately acknowledge his claims as being false. And that happened. When he made his 2 a.m. claim of having already won the election, multiple news reports, headlines, and even conservative pundits all said that this was false, premature, and irresponsible. Number 2. We need to make sure that the window during which his claims could be seen as true was kept as brief as possible. And that happened too. Multiple states that were favoring Trump in the early morning hours had already flipped to Biden by noon the next day. Meaning that not only did events unfold as predicted, but also that enough voters turned out and counting progressed quickly enough that that window was only hours and not days. And number 3, we needed evidence to suggest that his claim would not be proven true later. And that came in the form of Arizona being called for Biden. By Fox News, if you can believe it. This was quite possibly the most cathartic moment of the evening, as aggregate polls indicated that there were 7 true toss-up states, and that Trump would need all 7, while Biden would only need 1. And we got it. Note that this could all still change. Last I checked, all states are still in the process of counting ballots, and several of those that have already been called for Biden could still potentially flip back to Trump. But this was the baseline that we needed to hit in order to have a hope of preventing him from getting legitimately reelected or otherwise seizing power in a way that could potentially be seen by the public as legitimate. And we hit it. So, now what? Now that we've hit that baseline, what do we do next? That was the baseline that we needed to hit in order to move forward. So, how do we move forward? Because while we might still have hope, we're not out of the woods yet. As I said, ballots are still being counted, and Trump is going to pull out all the stops to delegitimize those ballots wherever possible. Now, this may seem like something you don't have power over, but you do. First, we need to look at what tactics Trump may use to delegitimize those ballots. He'll focus on the mail-in ballots. Not only are they likely to largely be submitted by Democrats, but they can also be delayed by postal slowdowns, or outright rejected by an incorrect or misplaced signature, or an improper envelope. But in some states, voters must be informed if their ballots are being rejected so that they have a chance to correct their errors. It's a process called curing, and it can extend to several days past the end of the election. And you can help. There are phone banks out there where you can reach out to voters, inform them that their ballot has been rejected, and remind them of how they can still cure their ballots before the vote counts are finalized. Right now, some of those big deadlines are November 6th for Georgia, November 8th for Arizona, November 10th for Ohio, and November 12th for Nevada. As you can see, these are coming up fast. Florida was going to be on this list, but I just couldn't get this video out before 5 p.m. on November 5th, because life things, well, November 3rd was scary for a whole different set of reasons completely unrelated to the election that I do not want to get into right now, but regardless, I am scouring the internet to get you the information that you need in order to help the people in these states get the help that they need in order to make sure that their voices are heard in this election. Because this is how we can help. This is how we can be superheroes. This is how we can be Power Rangers. This is how we can save the world. And that's not the only thing that you can do. Besides calling up voters, you can also call up election officials, donate to legal funds, and of course, check your ballot. Because your vote matters too. I included all these links in the description below, so please take a look and take whichever action you feel best fits your circumstances and abilities. So, is that it? Well, no. Of course not. As I've said before, removing Trump is only the beginning, and even that will require more actions that we may not even be aware of yet. He's not going down without a fight, and neither should we. But it's also not just about him. Removing him may slow the damage, but if we really want to effectively repair that damage, we are going to need a new Senate as well, and we are riding a very fine line on that. And that line runs straight through Georgia. You see, there are currently 2 Senate races in Georgia that are so close that they will be having runoff elections in January. And what makes this extra important is that if these 2 races go to the Democrats, that would give us a perfect 50-50 split that would finally break the 10-year hold that the Republican Party has had on the United States Senate. And guess who gets to be the tiebreaker in that situation? The Vice President of the United States. So not only does this mean that it's now extra important for Biden and Harris to secure the presidency, but it also means that over the next 2 months, our electoral focus will need to shift from the country as a whole to Georgia in particular. And I've included links below for how to volunteer for those races as well. So there we have it. A lot to take in, a lot to consider, and a lot still left to do. But we can do it. We've proven that now. Together. We've taken our first steps towards saving the world. Now, let's take the next one.